However, King Lamsa's daughter Princess Lucina was angered and outraged because she did not want her father to give her away to be the wife of the Shayuk King Fuequor. Princess Lucina felt like an outcast and out of place living amongst the Shayuk people, and she did not like living by the strict laws of the Shayuk people. Princess Lucina always wanted to marry a man from her own people, the Sini, and she did not want to be married to a Shayuk man. One day Princess Lucina, now the unhappy wife of King Fuequor, met Yashak, the jealous brother of King Fuequor, and they conspired together based on their hatred for King Fuequor to have an illicit sexual affair together behind the back of King Fuequor. Princess Lucina and Yashak would travel to the surface world to the home of Emo, the exiled brother of King Fuequor and Yashak, and it is here where they would have their illicit affair. This affair between Princess Lucina and Yashak went on for months, with them sneaking back and forth from the inner earth to the surface world, and eventually Princess Lucina became pregnant. In her pregnant state, Princess Lucina would not return to the land of the inner earth, but would remain at the home of Emo, and Yashak would stay with her. It was here in the home of Emo, 20 miles outside of the present-day city of Mecca, Saudi Arabia, where the child Yaqub was born to Yashak and Princess Lucina. The child Yaqub, being part Shayuk and part Sini, had an enormous head the size of 2 men, and he also had 2 brains. Knowing that they could not return to the inner earth because their affair had now produced a child, Yashak and Princess Lucina decided to live and raise the baby Yaqub for 5 years in the home of Emo, 20 miles outside of the present-day city of Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Yaqub's father Yashak would work as a scientist and a priest amongst the humans on the surface, calling himself by the title Mornuaken, the last high priest. Back in inner earth, Yashak and Princess Lucina had been missing for years, and eventually it was found out by King Fuequor about the affair between his wife Princess Lucina and his brother Yashak. King Fuequor ordered his soldiers to go to the home of his brother Emo and arrest Yashak for his crime, and according to the laws of the Shayuk, Yashak was put to death. Princess Lucina's life was spared because she now had a child to take care of, but her punishment was to remain exiled to the surface world, living in the home of Emo, and to never return to inner earth. Depressed about her inability to return home, overwhelmed by her new responsibility to raise a child, and saddened by the death of her lover Yashak, Princess Lucina kills herself by committing suicide. The 5-year-old child Yaqub, now an orphan, is raised by his uncle Emo, and the child Yaqub is emotionally disturbed and rebellious because of the death of his parents. The child Yaqub grows to hate his people, the Shayuk, and he also grows to hate all dark-complexioned people because he blames them for the death of his parents. The child Yaqub desires to have his revenge when he grows up. Yaqub starts school at the age of 4, and is teased and mocked about the size of his head by the surface-dwelling human children. This mockery and teasing about the size of his head that Yaqub experienced as a child created low self-esteem, and further infuriated the already deranged Yaqub, fueling his desire for revenge. Yaqub's uncle Emo would tell Yaqub stories about the beings in the inner earth and how the Samin were the manifestation of the evil grafted out of Yaqub's mother's family, the Sinin. One day, when Yaqub was 6 years old, he was playing with 2 steel magnets in the home of his uncle Emo, and Yaqub noticed the magnetic power of attraction and repulsion that unlike attracts, and like repels. By observing this, Yaqub was inspired with a determined idea to create a tribe unlike any of the people on the surface of the planet, and this unlike tribe would be weak and wicked, and attract the other tribes on the surface of the planet, and rule over them with the knowledge of tricks and lies for 6,000 years. Upon coming to this realization, Yaqub looked up at his uncle Emo and said, "Uncle, when I get to be an old man, I am going to make a people who shall rule you." Uncle Emo said, "What will you make?" "Someone to make mischief and cause bloodshed in the land." Yaqub responded to his uncle Emo by saying, "Nevertheless, uncle, I know that which you do not know," and it was at that moment, the boy Yaqub first came into the knowledge of just who he was, born to make trouble, break peace, kill and destroy, and be the enemy to the Ebenoid people of Earth. Yaqub knew in order to accomplish his plan he would have to study science, biology, and genetics. Yaqub was a child prodigy in school, being exceptionally smarter than the surface-dwelling humans he was going to school with, and by the age of 18, Yaqub had finished all of the colleges and universities of his nation. While in college, Yaqub was mocked and teased, being called the big head scientist. After graduating from the colleges and universities of his nation, Yaqub began to preach a new doctrine to the people in the city. Yaqub called his new doctrine Tricknology, and his holy book was called the Book of Tricknology of 120 Degrees. Yaqub taught that if people followed his doctrine, then they would be able to rule the world for 6,000 years, and make slaves out of everyone else on the earth. Yaqub made such impressions on the people that many people began following him, The children who once mocked and teased Yaqub were now requesting to be part of what he was teaching. The girls who once laughed at Yaqub were now women who desired him. As Yaqub's teachings spread, he made more and more converts to his new doctrine, and the power of Yaqub's doctrine began to intimidate the king of the surface-dwelling humans, who ordered to have Yaqub and all of his followers thrown in prison. The police arrested all of Yaqub's followers and put them in prison, and filled up all of the prison cells with Yaqub's followers. However, there was not enough space to put all of Yaqub's followers in jail, therefore there were still some people free who were spreading Yaqub's teachings. The police notified the king that they did not have enough space for all of Yaqub's followers, and at that point the king decided to go to Yaqub's prison cell and negotiate a deal. The king went to visit Yaqub in his prison cell, and the king said, "So you are Mr. Yaqub?" Yaqub said, "Yes, I am." The king said, "Yaqub, I have come to see if we could work out some agreement that would bring about an end to this trouble. What would you suggest?" Yaqub said to the king, "If you give me and my followers everything to start a civilization, and furnish us with money and other necessities of life for 20 years, I will take my followers and we will leave." The king was pleased with the deal offered by Yaqub, and agreed to take care of them for 20 years, until Yaqub's followers were able to go for themselves. After 20 years, the government began to make preparation for the exiling of Yaqub and his followers. The king ordered everyone rounded up who was a believer in Yaqub's doctrine, and they took them to the seaport and loaded them on ships. When Yaqub and his followers departed, there were a total of 59,999 followers plus Yaqub, making 60,000 total people on 100 ships. Yaqub and his fleet of ships departed from an area 20 miles outside of the present-day city of Mecca, Saudi Arabia, and set sail on the Red Sea, and sailed all the way around the continent of Africa to go to their destination, which was the area which is currently called the island of Patmos, or Palam, in the Aegean Sea. While on the ships sailing around Africa to get to the area which is currently called the island of Patmos, Yaqub began the second part of his plan, which was a eugenics human graftation experiment. Even though all of the people on the surface of the earth were of one tribe, the Ebenoid tribe, there was still some variation within the Ebenoid tribe, and Yaqub began to highlight these differences, and Yaqub taught these people that they were special, because Yaqub planned to use them to graft his new tribe. Yaqub developed his theory by studying his own genetics under the microscope and noticing that there were two different genes in him, one gene that was dark from his father Yishak's family, the Shayuk, and the other that was not dark from his mother Princess Lucina's family, the Sinin. Yaqub began to have children with the women on this ship, and the babies which were born that were a lighter complexion he would spare their life, but the babies which were born which were of a darker complexion, Yaqub would have thrown overboard into the ocean. Yaqub felt if he could successfully separate the darker gene from the lighter gene, then he could graft the Ebenoid tribe into its last stage, which would be albinoid. Yaqub planned to create a tribe of albinoids, which he discovered was weaker than the Ebenoid gene, which would be unalike, to rule the Ebenoid nation for 6,000 years. When Yaqub's followers found out about his new wicked plan, and learned that he was killing and throwing babies overboard into the ocean, 95% of his followers lost their loyalty to Yaqub, and abandoned his mission and jumped ship. As Yaqub's fleet of ships sailed around Africa, people who lost loyalty to his mission would jump ship into the areas which are now Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, Somalia, Mozambique, Namibia, Senegal, Morocco, and Tunisia. 10% of the original 60,000 of Yaqub's followers betrayed Yaqub and jumped ship. 85% of the original 60,000 of Yaqub's followers jumped ship because they were confused why he would do such a horrible thing, leaving only 5% of the original 60,000 of Yaqub's followers who actually made it to their destination of the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. As king on his island, Yaqub set up birth control and Planned Parenthood laws which would contribute to his plan of negative eugenics and genocide to breed his albinoid tribe. Yaqub made it a law that only the lighter complexion people could have children. People with darker complexions were put to death, and when children were born, nurses were ordered to have the darker babies killed by pricking the brains with a sharp needle as soon as the child's head was out of the mother, but the lighter babies were allowed to live. Yaqub's aim was to kill and destroy the Ebenoid nation. Yaqub would have the dead bodies of the darker babies fed to wild beasts, and if they could not find a wild beast to feed the bodies to, they would take the dead bodies of the babies to a cremator to be burned. This is the level of intense hatred Yaqub had in his heart. This process went on for years on Yaqub's island as Yaqub trained his sons and grandsons to carry on his work after he died. Yaqub died at the age of 150 years old from a brain tumor. As the father of technology, Yaqub taught his people a doctrine which would enable them to rule the world for 6,000 years. Yaqub also taught his people that God is a spirit and a spook and not a man. and Yaqub was the founder of the doctrine that unlike attracts and like repels. After 200 years on Yaqub's island, all of the darker babies had been done away with, and all babies were born of a new tribe called the Rubenoid tribe. After another 200 years, all babies were born of an even newer tribe called the Citrinoid tribe. And finally, after another 200 years, which makes 600 years total, all the babies born on Yaqub's island were of Yaqub's desired albinoid tribe. It took 600 years to breed Yaqub's albinoid tribe, and every imagination of their heart and all of their actions were wicked continuously. The evilness of the albinoids not only affected themselves, but also affected the other peoples of the world. Yaqub's albinoids returned to the city where they were exiled from. Once back in the city, it took only 6 months for Yaqub's albinoids to cause chaos and war amongst the Ebenoid people. The king of the Ebenoid people realized that it was Yaqub's albinoids who were causing all the trouble, and the king made a decree to drive Yaqub's evil albinoids from amongst them. The king rounded up all of Yaqub's albinoids and stripped them of their clothing, and put an apron on them to hide their nakedness, and sent his army with them across the desert to cross the burning sands into the place which is modern-day Europe. Yaqub's albinoids were roped into the mountains and caves, and the king's army would patrol the area to make sure Yaqub's albinoids stayed in the mountains and caves for 2,000 years to ensure that these people are kept away from the Ebenoid people. During this 2,000-year period living in the mountains and caves without anything to start civilization, Yaqub's albinoids became shameless, and lost all sense of shame and started going nude, and in the winter they wore animal skins for clothes and grew hair all over their bodies and faces like all the other wild animals. Yaqub's albinoids tamed the wolves and dogs to live in the caves with them, and after some time the dog held a high place among their family, becoming their best friend. After 2,000 years of living in the caves, the wickedness of Yaqub's albinoids was observed, and an Ebenoid man named Moshe was sent to civilize them. Moshe led Yaqub's albinoids out of the caves. However, once out of the caves, Yaqub's albinoids killed Moshe. Free from the caves, Yaqub's albinoids went on a rampage throughout the earth, conquering and subjecting the Ebenoid people, pitting one against the other using the idea of divide and conquer. Yaqub's albinoids began to execute Yaqub's plan for them to rule the world for 6,000 years. A man named Mahamdu attempted to teach Yaqub's albinoids to convince them to end their devilishment. However, this was still 1,400 years before the end of Yaqub's albinoids' 6,000-year period of dominion over the earth. And so, Yaqub's albinoids ruled the earth for 6,000 years, spreading their devilishment, evil, pain, suffering, and oppression to the Ebenoid people of the earth as designed by the big head scientist Yaqub. The events of Yaqub occurred approximately 6,600 years ago, and the 24 wise elder scientists of the inner earth foresaw the birth of Yaqub 15,000 years ago. This history, or future, of Yaqub and his people was predicted and foretold by the 24 wise elder scientists of the inner earth 8,400 years before the birth of Yaqub. The 24 wise elder scientists of the inner earth were aware of the birth of Yaqub, and they were aware of the things Yaqub would do before Yaqub was even born. The 24 wise elder scientists of the inner earth predicted that in the year 8,400, this man Yaqub would be born, and when this man was born, he will change civilization in the world, and produce a new tribe of people, who would rule the original Ebenoid people for 6,000 years, from the 9,000th year to the 15,000th year. After the 6,000-year rule of Yaqub's people, the Ebenoid people would give birth to one whose wisdom, knowledge and power would be infinite. One whom the world would recognize as being the greatest and mightiest since the creation of the universe, and that Yaqub's old warring wicked world would be removed and destroyed, and the Ebenoid nation would be restored into power to rule forever and to establish a world of peace and righteousness. This great Redeemer of the Ebenoid people, who was predicted by the 24 wise elder scientists of the inner earth to bring balance back into the world, is known under many names, titles, and attributes, including He who has no equal, He who there never was anyone like, the Supreme Being, the Mighty, the Wise, the Best Knower, the Light, the Life-Giver, the Guide, the All-Powerful, He who knows how to reproduce the universe and the people of his choice. But his mother calls him Yashmal. Yashmal was the son of Princess Radiya of the Shayuk family, and Prince Atif the Sinin family. Yashmal's parents, Princess Radiya and Prince Atif, married each other in order to establish peace between their two quarreling tribes. However,